Hey there, welcome back to the channel. I'm here today with another amazing story for you. My name is Dr. Hibbity Jibbity. Now, don't ask me where I got that name. I was born with it. I have a PhD in cryptozoology and ancient alien morphology. That means the study of big monsters. And today we're going to be talking about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti. We're going to go through their origins, where they came from, why they're still here, if they're still here. Now first things first, the two names are interchangeable. Bigfoot and Sasquatch are basically the same thing. When you get up into Canada, British Columbia, Washington State, Oregon, Northern California, Nevada, Utah, even Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, there's sightings all over this country. The only difference between Bigfoot and Sasquatch is the word root. Bigfoot comes from a very scientific place. It comes from the word bipes, which is Latin for to feet. Sasquatch comes from the Old Taos, a native tribe that's, in California, Northern California, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia. Sasquatch comes from Saxu, which is literally translated hair that covers the bottom. So a biped that has hair covering its bottom. But really what we're talking about is the big man, the hairy giant man-like creature. Now let's talk about Yeti. That's a whole different kettle of worms. That's a whole different monster. Now the Yeti is said to come from Tibet, Nepal area. This is a high-altitude dweller. They say it lives up in the mountains. There is villages where people will tell you stories about the mysterious beast that is up in the mountain. Now they don't call it Yeti. They call it me-go. And me-go comes from the word me, which means monster, and go meaning to eat. So this is a monster that eats. This is a very primal fear. In ancient times and even now when you hear about these creatures that live up in the mountains, that live in the deep woods, the forests, and they come out and they kill livestock, they devour their sheep, their goats, their cattle, their horses, whatever. These are primal fears. The unknown always goes back to that. Whatever is in the dark, we don't know what it is. It's a monster. And so because we don't know what it is, it becomes a monster. So the origin of these creatures, like all cryptids, comes from folklore, comes from myths and legends. But what did those myths and legends start from? What is the origin of that? Because a story, a myth, a legend can only be as good as its source material. Where does that come from? Well, this is the interesting part. All these myths and legends, not just for the Sasquatch and Bigfoot, but also the werewolf, the vampire, the zombie, all these things come from one source, and that is the people. Now, not people in general, but primitive people who lived thousands of years ago and were isolated and didn't have the benefit of education and understanding. They saw things and they didn't understand what they were. They saw things and they needed to explain them to themselves. And they didn't have the benefit of science, so they created things. They created reasons for these things. They invented stories to fit their reality. So in North America, the Sasquatch fits perfectly within the native culture. It's called the big man. It's called the hairy giant man beast. And it actually fits within their oral tradition. In fact, there are several tribes in North America who believe that the Sasquatch is an actual deity. It's a god. It's a spirit. It's a religious icon. And so they take great pains to avoid it, to keep away from it. And they tell their children about it, not as a boogeyman, but as a god, a supreme being that you don't mess with. And the stories vary from tribe to tribe, but they all center around the big man, the hairy giant man beast that walks on two legs, has incredible strength, moves through the forest undetected, is incredibly fast. It's agile. It's smart. It's curious. It has incredible senses. And some of the tribes even claim that the Sasquatch can change its shape. It can turn itself into a bear. It can turn itself into a wolf. And that's where I think the confusion starts. People see the bear, people see the wolf, and they say, well, that must be a man in a costume, or that must be a trained animal. But what if it isn't? What if it's something that's actually real? What if it's something that we can't understand? I've been studying these cryptids for decades, and I firmly believe that the Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti, all of these are real. They exist. We have proof of their existence, whether we want to believe it or not. There are countless photos. There are countless videos. There are countless eyewitness accounts. And I mean countless, hundreds upon hundreds. But there's also physical evidence, footprints, hair samples, DNA samples. A lot of the DNA samples have been debunked, but I think that's because the powers that be, the government, whoever wants to debunk it, they find any reason they can to debunk it. I mean, we found bones of prehistoric creatures. We found bones of dinosaurs. We found bones of prehistoric humans. Why can't we find bones of the Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti? They're no different than us. They're probably no more extinct than we are. Maybe they're here right now watching this show. The one thing that's really important to remember about these cryptids is that they're intelligent, okay? They're not stupid. They're not slow. They're not deaf, dumb, and blind. They're extremely intelligent, which is why we haven't caught them yet. They're extremely elusive, which is why we haven't caught them yet. They're extremely shy, which is why we haven't caught them yet. They are animals. They are living, breathing creatures just like you and me. They have instincts and they have desires and they have needs just like you and me. And we need to respect that. Just because we haven't seen them doesn't mean they aren't real. Just because we haven't captured one doesn't mean they aren't real. Doesn't mean they aren't here. They are here. And the question is, do we believe in them? Do we accept that they're here? Do we try to make contact with them? Or do we pretend they aren't here, pretend they don't exist, pretend we don't know anything about them, pretend we're not interested in them? The reality is, we're interested in them. And I think there's a reason why. I think there's a reason why we're interested in them. And I think it goes back to the source material. Remember, all of these myths and legends, all these stories come from primitive people who were isolated, didn't have the benefit of education, didn't have the benefit of science, didn't have the benefit of technology. They saw something and they had to make sense of it. They had to explain it to themselves. They had to explain it to their children. Now, what if instead of saying, "Oh, my God, look at that, it was an alien," what if they said, "Oh, my God, look at that, it's a giant man-like creature"? They saw something that was so foreign to them, so strange, that it simply defied explanation. And so they created explanations. They created stories to fit their reality. So when we hear these stories today and we believe them or we don't believe them, what are we really believing? Are we really believing in these mythical creatures that have been passed down to us for generations? Or are we really believing in aliens that happen to look exactly like the creature that was described thousands of years ago? There's another aspect to this too. If we're talking about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, all these different things, we're also talking about red hair giants. In fact, most of the descriptions of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti all include red hair. Now, where does that come from? That's a whole different discussion. But it leads us to believe that maybe these creatures weren't native to this world at all. Maybe they came from another world. Maybe they came from another dimension. Maybe they're interdimensional beings. In fact, there are stories of red-haired giants all over the world. There are stories of red-haired giants in the Bible. In fact, the book of Enoch talks about the Nephilim and the Watchers. The Watchers were angels, and they came down from the sky, and they mated with human women, and they produced offspring. Those offspring were called the Nephilim, and they were giants. And it wasn't just the book of Enoch that talked about the Nephilim. It was actually the Bible itself. Genesis talks about the sons of God, which is another term for the Watchers, and how they came down from heaven and mated with human women and produced offspring. And it says in the Bible that the giants on earth were destroyed, but it never says that they were all destroyed. Maybe there are still some here. Maybe that's why we have stories of red-haired giants all over the world, all over the United States, all over Canada, all over the mountainous regions of Asia, all over the mountainous regions of Africa. Maybe they're real. Maybe we just haven't found one yet. The reality is, there are many people who claim to have seen Bigfoot and Sasquatch in recent years, in recent months. And I believe them. I believe them because there's so many of them. And they're not just some crazy crackpots. These are everyday people who just go out in the woods and they see something that they can't explain. And maybe they shouldn't explain it. Maybe they should leave it unexplained because that's what makes it so fascinating. I'm Dr. Hibbity Jibbity. This has been my report. Remember, don't trust atoms. They make up everything.